two people who had found something worth hiding for 11 years. Mara understood, lying there in the dark with his absence beside her already an ache, that she was no longer entirely sure whether she was afraid of becoming a third name added to that hidden history, or afraid of not being given the chance. The attorney's office smelled of old paper and older certainties, and Mara sat in a leather chair too large for her, Elias beside her in the twin of it, close enough that their hands might have touched if either of them had dared. Neither did. Some instinct in both of them understood that whatever was about to be said belonged to a kind of formality that did not permit comfort. The attorney, an older man, precise in his movements, the kind of person who had spent a lifetime being the messenger for other people's devastations, opened a folder and did not waste time on preamble. There is a codicil, he said, added to your grandmother's will 11 months before her death. It was filed separately from the main estate documents at her explicit instruction, to be read only in the event that the lease agreement with Mr. Greatwood came into question. It appears that moment has arrived. Mara felt the room tilt very slightly. Mr. Greatwood, she repeated, peering across at Elias. The attorney glanced up, something like pity crossing his face before he could suppress it. Elias Greatwood, your grandmother's husband, married in a private ceremony 11 years ago, 4 months after he first came to live in the house. The marriage was never disclosed to the rest of the family. She was explicit about her reasons, which are recorded here, if you'd like me to read them. The silence that followed had a texture to it, thick and immovable, and Mara turned slowly to look at the man beside her. The man who had held her on a study floor 3 nights ago and called what they had real, who had promised her the truth would come when she was braver, who had let her fall in love with him under a name that was, it turned out, not even the half-truth she'd assumed it to be, but something far stranger and far larger. Greatwood, she said. Yes, the attorney responded. The husband of the late Mrs. Greatwood. You're married into this family. You are legally my... She couldn't finish it. The word wouldn't form. Her husband, Elias said quietly, which makes me, in every sense the law recognizes, your step-grandfather. The word landed in the room like something falling from a great height, and for a long moment nobody moved. Mara stared at him, at the face she had traced with her own hands 3 nights before, at the man she had let herself fall toward with a recklessness she hadn't felt in years, and tried to reconcile it with the sentence he had just spoken. You knew, she said finally, very quietly. This whole time, every conversation, every evening by the fire, her voice broke. The night on the study floor, you knew exactly what that would make us, and you let it happen anyway. I knew, he agreed, and he did not look away from her, did not flinch from the accusation the way he might have flinched from smaller ones. I have known since the moment I saw you standing in that doorway, and felt something in me come back to life, that I thought your grandmother had taken with her when she died. I knew, and I let it happen anyway, because I am not a good enough man to have stopped it, and because some part of me has been so hungry to be known by someone in this family that I told myself the shape of what we were becoming didn't matter as much as the fact of it. Don't, Mara said. Don't make it sound romantic. Don't make it sound like poetry. This is, she gestured helplessly at the folder, at the attorney's carefully composed face, at the whole architecture of the lie she'd been living inside for weeks. This is grotesque, Elias. Do you understand that? Whatever we were to each other, whatever it felt like on that floor, it doesn't change what it actually is. I know exactly what it is, Elias said, and something in his voice had gone very still, very grave, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this moment in the dark for longer than she could imagine. It is the second betrayal built on top of the first. I loved a woman who died carrying a secret I helped her keep. And then I let her granddaughter fall in love with the ghost of that secret without telling her what she was reaching for. I am not asking you to forgive that. I don't believe it can be forgiven. I am only asking you to let me explain it, because I think you deserve the whole shape of the thing, even if the whole shape of it is unforgivable. They did not speak again until they were back in the house. The fire lit against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The photograph from the study still sitting on the mantel where Mara had left it. Her grandmother laughing in a garden, Elias's arm loose around her waist. Both of them radiant with a joy that now curled into something Mara could barely look at. Say it, she said, standing at the window with her back to him, watching the dark water beyond the point. Whatever you've been rationing out to me, one careful piece at a time, since the night I arrived. Say all of it. I am done being protected from my own life. Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had the cadence of something long prepared, spoken not to persuade her, but simply because it was, at last, time to be entirely true. I came to this house 11 years ago because I had nothing left anywhere else. He said, "Your grandmother hired me to fix a fence that never needed fixing because she'd seen me sleeping in my car in the lot by the harbor and didn't have the heart to leave a man to the cold. I meant to stay a week. I stayed because she was the first person in longer than I could remember who asked me a question and then waited, actually waited, for the whole answer. Do you understand what that does to a man who has spent his life being interrupted before he finishes a sentence? It's a kind of resurrection. I did not fall in love with her because she was beautiful, though she was. I fell in love with her because she made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like a person worth listening to. We did not plan for it to become what it became. Love rarely consults us before it arrives. It simply arrives, the way weather arrives, indifferent to whether we have made room for it. And once it had arrived, we found that the world had not built a place for it to live honestly. A woman of her age, a man of mine. Your family would have called it exploitation before they ever let themselves consider it might be devotion. They would have looked at the difference in our years and seen only the ugliest possible story, because that is the story the world already knows how to tell about people like us. So we built a smaller world instead, just the two of us, in a house full of other people's absence, and we let it be enough. because the alternative was losing each other to the judgment of people who would never trouble themselves to understand. I do not regret loving her. I will go to whatever comes after this life, still certain that those 11 years were the truest thing I ever did with my time on earth. But I have come to understand, standing in that lawyer's office today, watching your face change, that love hidden long enough begins to rot the thing it was meant to protect. We thought we were protecting our happiness. What we were actually doing was building a room with no doors and calling the absence of an exit a kind of peace. Mara had turned from the window by the time he finished, and there were tears on her face she made no effort to hide. "And me," she said. "Where do I fit in the room with no doors, Elias? Was I ever meant to be let in? Or was I always just going to be the person who found it, the way I found the photograph? I don't know," he said, and it was the most honest thing he had said to her since the night she arrived. I have asked myself that question every night since you walked through that door. I told myself at first that I owed you nothing but civility and the truth eventually. And then you sat across from me at that table, with her handwriting in your hands, grieving her the way I grieved her. And something in me recognized something in you, and I stopped being able to tell where my love for her ended and whatever this new, impossible thing with you began. Perhaps loving you at all is a betrayal of the memory of loving her. I have turned that thought over more times than I can count, and I have not yet found the bottom of it. "Then why," Mara said, her voice breaking, "why let it happen at all? Why not stop it the moment you felt it starting, if you knew what it would cost? Because I am not made of the kind of restraint that saints are made of, Elias said, and for the first time something like anger moved beneath the grief in his voice. Not anger at her, but at the impossible math of the entire situation. Because I had spent 11 years learning how to love someone in secret, and when I felt myself beginning to love you, I did not know how to do anything except what I already knew, which was to hide it, ration it, hope it would either burn out on its own or become something I could finally, someday, bring into the light. I was wrong. I see that now. I should have told you the moment I felt it, standing in that hallway the first night, before either of us had given ourselves a single reason to want to protect what was happening instead of ending it. I did not. That failure belongs entirely to me. Mara sat down heavily in the chair by the fire, the photograph still watching from the mantel, and the silence encircled them entirely. The wind had picked up outside, not yet a storm, but the low, relentless prelude to one. The kind of sound the house seemed to have built to hold. Do you believe? She asked at last, staring into the fire rather than at him, that love is owed to us in some order, that it has to arrive to the right person at the right time, wearing the right name, or else it doesn't count as love at all, only as a kind of trespass. Elias considered this for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice had the unhurried cadence of a man who had spent many solitary years turning such questions over in the dark, with no one to test them against but himself. I used to believe love was a kind of inheritance, he said, something passed down in an order, like a name or a house. You were owed the love of your family in a particular sequence. Parent, then grandparent, then whatever came after. And anything that arrived outside that sequence was, by definition, a theft from someone else's rightful portion. I believed that for most of my life, because it is a comforting thing to believe. It makes love orderly. It makes grief legible. But I have come to think that love does not move in sequence at all. It moves the way water moves, finding whatever low, unguarded place it can reach, without any concern for whose land it was supposed to belong to. It does not ask whether the ground has already been claimed. It only asks whether there is room to pull. I do not think that makes it trespass. I think it only means the maps we draw of who is allowed to love whom, and in what order, were never as solid as we wanted them to be. They are drawn in sand, all of them, and the tide does not consult the boundary lines before it comes in. That's a very beautiful way, Mara said with the faintest, aching trace of a smile, of telling me that you don't actually know whether what happened between us was allowed. No, he admitted. It is not an answer. It is only the shape of the question I have been circling for 3 days, unable to reach its center. I don't think there is a philosophy generous enough to make this simple, Mara. I think there is only the truth of what we felt, and the truth of what it costs, existing side by side, refusing to cancel each other out. I keep trying to hate you, she said finally, very quietly. It would be so much simpler if I could hate you. You'd be the villain of a story I could tell at Christmas. The caretaker who preyed on a lonely old woman and then tried to seduce her granddaughter for the house. It's a story with a shape I understand, but I sat across from you at that table and heard the real one, and it doesn't have that shape at all. It has the shape of two people who found love in the one place nobody thought to look for it, and then found more of it than either of you knew what to do with. And I don't know how to hate a story like that, Elias. I only know how to grieve it. Then grieve it, Elias said softly. I will not ask you to forgive me tonight, or tomorrow, or perhaps ever. But I will not lie to you about the fire on that study floor either. What we felt there was not a costume worn over some older love. It was its own true thing, arriving inconveniently, the way all the important things in my life have arrived, without asking permission, without waiting for the world to make room. He left before dawn. Mara woke to the sound of a car in the drive and came downstairs to find him standing in the front hall with a single bag. The small hall where she had first found him standing at the top of the stairs, impossibly certain, impossibly calm. He looked now like a man who had spent the whole night deciding something and had finally arrived at the far side of that decision. I am not leaving because I stopped loving either of you, he said before she could speak. I am leaving because staying would only compound what I have already done. You deserve a house that is only yours, Mara, not one haunted by a man who cannot separate his grief for your grandmother from whatever he feels for you. And you deserve the chance to grieve her and to grieve whatever this was between us without my presence complicating either sorrow into something you can never fully name. Where will you go? I don't know yet, he said. I have not needed to know where I was going in 11 years. I find I am out of practice at leaving. Elias, let me finish, please. I have rehearsed this since midnight, and I am afraid if I stop, I will lose the courage to say it at all. He set down the bag, and for a moment the old steadiness returned to his face. The steadiness she had first mistaken for arrogance and had come slowly to understand as simply the bearing of a man who had made peace with more grief than most people carry in a lifetime. There is a kind of love that is only permitted to exist in secret, and I have now spent the better part of my adult life inside two of them. I don't think that is coincidence or circumstance. I think it is something in me that reaches for what cannot be kept. Perhaps because some old, unhealed part of me does not believe I deserve the kind of love that gets to live in the light. I do not say this to excuse anything. I say it because I think you deserve to understand the whole shape of the man you loved briefly on a study floor. Not just his tenderness, but the wound underneath it. I loved your grandmother the way the tide loves the shore, faithfully, completely, always with the understanding that the shape of that love would have to be redrawn every single day, because the world would never simply let it stand. And I think if I am honest with myself in this last hour, that I began to love you the way a man loves the dawn after a very long night. Grateful, disoriented, unsure whether what he is feeling is love for the light itself or simply relief that the darkness has finally ended. You deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, Mara. Not as the last living door back into a life I was not permitted to keep. I am not yet certain I know how to give you that. Until I am, the kindest thing I can do for both of us is to go. Mara stood in the hallway, the morning light just beginning to grey the windows, and found that she had no argument left to offer, only grief, wide and formless, for a woman she had failed to know in time, and for a man she had known perhaps too well, too fast, in the wreckage of that failure. Will you write to me? She asked. Or is that another kind of secret you'll decide I can't be trusted with? Something that was almost a smile moved across his face, sorrowful and real. I will write to you, he said. Not the careful, rationed letters I used to leave for your grandmother in the kitchen drawer. The whole truth this time. As much of it as I have learned to say out loud. I owe you that. I think, in some strange way, I owe it to her too, to finally practice loving someone the way she deserved to be loved all along, without hiding, without half measures, without a room built with no doors. He picked up his bag. At the threshold, he turned back once more, and Mara would remember for the rest of her life the particular quality of the light behind him, grey and rising, and the way he looked at her, like a man memorizing a shoreline he did not expect to see again. For what it's worth, he said, loving you was never the mistake. The mistake was thinking I could love you in the same silence I'd already spent a decade learning. Some loves are only honest in the light. I am only now learning the difference. Then he was gone, down the drive and out past the gate, and Mara stood alone in the doorway of a house that held within its walls the wreckage and the wonder of two loves it had never been built to hold at once. Behind her, on the mantel, her grandmother went on laughing in a garden that no longer existed, forever caught in the one moment when love had not yet needed hiding. Mara did not cry until the sound of his car had faded entirely into the sound of the sea. Then she sat down on the stairs where she had first seen him, and let herself grieve everything at once. The grandmother she had failed, the man she had almost kept, and the strange, aching mercy of a love story that had, in the end, chosen honesty over its own survival. She sat there a long while, until the grey light through the transom window had turned to something closer to gold, and found, beneath the raw ache of it, a single thought she could not quite dislodge, that grief and gratitude are not opposites, however much they resemble each other in the first hours of loss. She was grieving a man she had known for 3 short weeks, as though he were a country she had lived in her whole life, and she was, in the same breath, grateful for a grandmother who had found her tide grateful for a house that had finally told her the truth of itself. Grateful even for the wound, because a wound this deep could only be carved by something that had, however briefly, been entirely real. The sea went on outside, indifferent and constant, the way it had gone on through every year of her grandmother's hidden happiness, and every year of her own careless distance. And Mara understood, sitting on those stairs in the rising light, that some houses are not haunted by the dead at all. They are haunted only by the living, by everything the living were too afraid to say to each other while there was still time, and that the truest inheritance her grandmother had left her was not the house or the furniture or even the photograph on the mantel, but the terrible, necessary lesson that love left unspoken does not disappear. It only waits patiently in a drawer beside old letters for someone brave enough to finally read it whole.